The idea of in-housing programmatic media is rising yet again for brands and agencies in 2022. Despite the concept of in-housing debuting nearly a decade ago, many organizations that buy programmatic media but pass on it are reconsidering it. This resurgence of interest begs the question, why now? There are some common and likely reasons to want to pursue it, like cost savings and greater transparency around working media and fees. But organizations interested in in-housing need to ask themselves, why are we re-exploring this today? Are we prepared to handle the short-term disruption this change will cause? And what do we need to add to our arsenal of tools to take on this responsibility? And are we staffed correctly? Raashee Gupta Erry regularly asks and fields these types of questions, amongst many others. As the principal and founder of digital media consultancy UpLevel, she helps clients break down considerations when evaluating the possibility of bringing programmatic in-house and has helped many do so successfully. If being the successful owner of a digital media consultancy wasn't enough, she's also a senior advisor on platforms and ad tech to the Federal Trade Commission and a White House presidential fellow who helps elevate marketing, communication, and social media programs. I chat with Raashee about determining if in-housing is right for an organization's unique needs, the many ways to interpret what in-housing can entail, who needs to be involved in considering it, and much more. Let's jump into this episode with Raashee Gupta Erry on how to consider in-housing right now. Raashee, how is your day going so far? And thanks for joining me to have this conversation on consulting clients about programmatic in-housing.
Yeah, it's been an amazing day. I feel like spring is almost around the corner. So I'm just counting days, but overall, all good.
Likewise, it is very nice in Chicago today. We've been getting some flip-flopping. We got some temporary snow, but that seems to have settled. And so I think people are feeling pretty optimistic about 2022. So I'm glad to hear that's the perspective across states.
Yeah, that's the perspective in DC. So I can represent that.
Good. Great. Well, we can go ahead and jump right into things. Now, you run a consultancy. So I want to ask you a very basic question. What is key to taking a consultative approach when serving your clients?
I'll speak for myself. So I really start with any conversation, whether it's with a prospect or with a client, with a problem solving approach, like a problem solution approach. This sounds cliche, but it really that's what makes authentic when you know the intent behind it. And true consulting to me has always been like there's a giving mindset and the empathy at the core of it. So you really want to understand the client's or the prospect's problem and have an objective brainstorm about the various solutions and look at it from a client's position, understand sort of what are the different ways that they are looking at the problem, what are their needs, what are their wants, what are their limitations. Really get yourself in the client's shoes and then be okay to walk away if you can't provide the right solution. And that's been my sort of approach. It's been really listening mode, understanding what the problem is, proposing solutions, and solutions very well could be something in my wheelhouse or something may not be in my wheelhouse, but I know that that's what feels right for the client. That's the approach I take to my consultancy, where we really strive ourselves to be that objective voice, to be that pragmatic voice, so that we can be committed to our clients and clients come back to us time and again because they can trust us.
You mentioned just a little bit ago that there are things that are going to be in your wheelhouse and there are going to be things that are outside your wheelhouse. And that's true for any consulting organization. What are areas of focus where you consult or guide clients?
Our focus at UpLevel is on digital media. So that's been sort of like our sole focus. And we function as a part agency, part consultancy. The reason why we do that is this enables us to be nimble with the needs of the clients, where an engagement can be a part of a full picture or it could be a full end-to-end solution, but it lets us sort of dive into that problem that they're having and help them find a solution, which is not comes with a lot of commitment, a lot of baggage, if they can't commit to a long-term engagement. But at the same time, we position ourselves as a trusted resource. So that's why I say it's part consultancy, part agency. And in terms of the work that we do, is it really starts with three pillars. One is for all our engagements, we provide data strategy to really help find and expand the client's audience. So understand who they are, who's their customer, and who they want to bring in as a customer, and help them find those folks, find that middle ground, and help them expand that footprint. Two, this relates to media and planning. Media planning and activation is to really help them deliver those targeted experiences and get the desired action. And this action could be anywhere in the purchase funnel. It could be branding, it could be consideration, it could be direct response. So really, it runs the gamut, and it varies from business to business. And then lastly, help them scale and operationalize their internal organization so they can accelerate. So this is where a lot of in-housing or agency transformation comes into play. Being nimble is very important because, as you can hear me saying, we can come in at any step of the process, whether they are super early in deciding the strategy and big picture audience-based marketing, database marketing strategy, or they are somewhere in the middle where they're in the execution stage, or they are trying to be they are much mature in the marketing life cycle and they want to do things in-house, or they want to expand, or they want to do a hybrid operation.
I think the word you used is exactly right, that you can be incredibly nimble, so you can serve a lot of different types of client needs from a digital media perspective. So I think it's a relief to a lot of organizations that want to get into the topic that we're looking to broach for today's conversation, which is on this concept of in-housing. So as it relates to there being many different types of in-housing, but specifically for our chat today, in-housing media, why has that become so popularized, specifically from a programmatic perspective?
Yeah, I mean, in-housing started with the programmatic trend and programmatic coming onto the forefront, and I feel like there is this behavior of in-housing functioning as a trend. It has its ups and downs. Like, it was really popular like 5 to 7 years ago when RTB, all these kind of like ways of programmatic buying came into the picture, and then fast forward to pandemic hit, and I think a lot of the excitement died down just because people were just trying to survive, businesses were trying to stay afloat. There's a lot of behavior change happening from a consumer adoption standpoint. And then fast forward to today, there is sort of like, I feel like it's a mixed bag as I speak today, because there is future forward changes that the market is going through, with data privacy being a very big component of that, where there are headwinds from both technology side as well as regulation side. So when you truly think of in-housing, you have to operate and you have to operationalize your in-housing efforts to suit with the landscape that you're in. And it's not just media buying. It's not just kind of like bringing people in-house, bringing tools in-house, bringing kind of like a transactional channel in-house. It really has to be looked upon in an entire sort of spectrum of how data is intersecting your organization, how data is inflowing and outflowing. And that's where I feel like it's in a middle ground, where I've heard brands who had totally converted to in-house kind of taking a step back. Other folks are starting to kind of like take baby steps towards it. Some people are mature. So it really is a mixed state right now. And I feel like with data privacy, as I said, it becomes even more important to understand how the data sits in your organization, how the channels are connected together or not connected together, and who your players and partners are. And that's when you want to take another look at it.
You brought up the fact that 5 to 7 years ago, in-housing really popularized with the rise of RTB. Many organizations maybe were overly optimistic about perhaps the simplicity with which they would be able to adopt the capacity to in-house digital media and programmatic media buying. So clients are at many different levels, as you just mentioned. How do you help guide clients to find the tier of in-housing that's going to really work best for them?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and that comes up every time I have a conversation with the client. Is it starts with the problem solution discovery. You have to go down to the brass tacks, to the bare minimum of like questions like what the challenge is, why they're thinking of in-housing, why do think it will work for them, what are some of the other solutions that they've considered, and really sort of do a feasibility check on all of these, because a lot of times clients might be looking at in-housing as a shiny object, or they might be looking at in-housing as a way to cut cost. Unless you really kind of get into it and analyze it and understand what goes in, what are the requirements, what is a good functioning operation looks like when you want to bring in-house, it takes time and energy. And really helping the clients think through these solutions is one part of the consulting that we do, is ask those hard questions, have a sit down moment, have an analysis on our existing state, and then really understand what are you trying to change and what is the problem. Sometimes the answer is in housing, sometimes it might be a hybrid solution, sometimes it might be sort of like let's kind of chop it up in small chunks and do one part at a time. So it really varies. In housing in general is expensive. It's an expensive venture in many ways. It takes time, it takes energy, it's costly. It is disruptive to the normal flow of organization. If a company has been working with agencies for a really long time and all of a sudden you want to sort of stop that and bring things in-house, it does create a ripple effect. It does slow down the operations, or at least make them different or make them disruptive. So really have to be thinking about those things, like what's their aptitude, what's their tolerance level, what is the marketing life cycle in their organization looks like, what are their key moments, and what are their downtimes, and when is the right time to do it. So it really is, it's a lot of those questions that have to be answered at a very early stage.
You mentioned that it is both costly and disruptive, which I can't disagree with. Even being with an organization that focuses on assisting organizations to make that shift, but there are costs. And I think sometimes when people want to jump in with both feet, they aren't necessarily always doing that full analysis up front. You really have to build the vision and understand that you're getting yourself into a marriage is really what you're doing. It's very different from the IO-based relationships of just testing a publisher and then doing away with it because you can just cut ties very quickly. So even if you do all the pre-planning, the long-term intention is for you to be self-sufficient in some regard. And obviously you mentioned that there are tiers to it, but I do think it's important to just confront the realities of the circumstances. And so I do appreciate the way that you framed it. Another question for me, as far as who it is that needs to be at the table to have this conversation with you. I assume that if a organization, an ad agency, or a brand chose to interact with you so that they could figure out how they could go about in-housing, they probably have the right stakeholders at the table. But can you define and share who it is that needs to be having that conversation with you so you're getting that full scope of understanding what that particular client of yours really needs to consider in-housing?
Sure. I will go back to the previous question first quickly. The disruptive comment that I made, it disruption is not always bad. I think that's the key. It's like there is disruption for good reasons and disruption for bad reasons, and disruption can also lead to innovation. And it ties back to your question about stakeholders. When they are thinking of disruption, they need to look at sort of stakeholders that they are going to be engaging with, and this change impacts. It is, and what do these people think is disruptive? Is disruptive in a bad sense, or is disruptive innovation for them? And it ties really nicely with the stakeholder piece. Is different organizations will be at different stage and also at a different scale in housing, depending on where they are in the process and what scale of in-housing they want to do. The stakeholder participation varies. So I'll give two examples. One, when I had done in-housing, being at a brand as a brand marketer, it was kind of like us wanting to bring in the programmatic tech stack. We wanted to bring in the tech stack of DSP and DMPs in-house and still have our agencies operationalize it. And at that point in my conversations on the table, I was talking with IT, I was talking with CRM folks, I was talking with finance, legal, product, because all of these folks had either direct influence or indirect influence onto the programs that we were going to run through the programmatic pipes. So it's really important for us to bring them on board, have the conversations, understand what their needs are, what are the security limitations, for example, from an IT standpoint, what are the data challenges from CRM standpoint. So really understand those pieces and have those conversations early on and have them be part of the process. And then on the flip side, at UpLevel, where we've helped clients in-house, there again, our main POC was marketing folks, but we know that they were talking to and their decisions were influenced by HR, by IT, by comms, by finance. HR comes into play here because in-housing requires you to staff up a team. So they needed to kind of like understand what skill set they need. Do they have people? Do they don't have people? What kind of upskilling can they do internally? Are they going to be sort of putting people out of jobs if they brought this tool in-house? Like, so a lot of those conversations were also important, even though we were a consulting arm to the marketing folks. But we know either we had direct conversations in partnership with our marketing clients, or we had indirect questions that were brought to us via the marketing POC, which clearly needed to be addressed from the standpoint of comms, finance, and HR folks.
I'm on board with everything you've shared. And I think it just illustrates that, to your earlier point, that disruption isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is disruptive. But what is it? The expression, it's that big risk or big sacrifices can ultimately offer high yield, high reward. And that's at least the intention with which people are pursuing this. Of course, there's going to be variation in how much preparation people do, but that's a nice thing about organizations like your own when people can be consulted on what they're getting themselves into, because getting some handholding is definitely necessary. It's not quite a process that you want to jump into unaided. So I appreciate those points there. And you mentioned so many of the stakeholders, which I think there are many. And sometimes an organization, at least initially, may not be thinking of some of those stakeholders. So again, it's appreciated that you can point out who all else needs to be at the table for that. Pivoting from there into another question, which is finding the right balance between outsourcing and in-housing, because whether really every organization is thinking about both. They're doing some things that they're outsourcing because of the simplicity and turnkey nature of not needing to have FTEs on board and having something just shipped out elsewhere. And then on the flip side, understanding and doing that cost benefit analysis to figure out when do we want to in-house and create that internal new revenue source or opportunity to minimize costs, trim margins that we're giving to somebody else elsewhere. So I bring that all up to just ask that question of you. How does a client find the right balance between in-housing and outsourcing?
I think this again is a very critical question that starts with the early stage conversations in the discovery phase. Why do you need to in-house? Why this idea is appealing to you? And what are you trying to change by bringing in things in-house? A lot of times this starts the conversations, it starts that deep thinking in terms of, do you have a fundamental problem in terms of you have a matrix organization on your end and hence you need kind of like to operate a certain way? Or is it need for speed? Or is it that you are sitting on a lot of personal data that you don't want to be sharing outside, and data privacy and security is an important component to your operations? Or you might be operating in a more sensitive category like a health or a financial sector. So it really sort of like important to have those questions to then come to a understanding of what's the right balance between in-housing and outsourcing. And it could be that you outsource components that are a little more sort of like standalone as opposed to channels which are super intertwined with each other, or you're outsourcing the operations but you are owning the relationships and the contracts and the data and the tech stack, and you are enabling sort of your agency partners to be the operators of your systems? Or are you doing all in and you are sort of having everything in-house, contracting in-house, having your tech relationships in-house, and also hiring internally? And with that, one thing that agencies provide a lot of value is kind of like a lot of shared learnings, and they're always kind of like doing a lot of different things and all constantly being on top of the changes. So how important is that education? How important is that outside thinking? How important is that outside out of box creativity for you in order to for your business is also important. So I think there are levels of outsourcing and in-housing. And again, as I said before, I've personally wanted to bring in parts of programmatic tech stack inside. I've helped companies set up their social media operations all the way from tech stack to analytics to sort of operationalizing their pages and platforms to building teams. So it really varies. But I think in the time that we stand today, it is very important to look at in-housing and outsourcing decisions with data privacy in mind. Just kind of like the work I do today, the brand and the consumer are in a relationship, and it's the brand's responsibility to really own that relationship and nurture and protect that relationship. All the other entities in between, ad tech, analytics, any of these providers that are in there are conduits to that relationship, and everybody's trying to kind of like make that relationship efficient or effective in different ways. But end of the day, it's the brand and the customer that's in the relationship, and brands have to really be careful, and they have to be very much respectful of the privacy of the data of their consumers. This area is only going to get more complex, and it ties directly into media because we are seeing a lot of headwinds from technology changes with cookieless solutions out there, and all the browser changes and the mobile changes, as well as a lot of regulation changes where GDPR, CCPA, other states are coming up with the regulations. Every other day, you hear there's one new state on the table wanting to do their privacy rulemaking. It really is important because data is at the center of all this. Data is at the center of all the media that we do in the digital world. It's important for the brands to at least understand what the privacy world looks like. What are the different roles that people play? Like there are entities who are processors or service providers under various rules, GDPR, CCPA. There are data transfer requirements. There are data sharing and selling restrictions. Who is doing what on your behalf is very important. So even if you do in-housing or outsourcing, you need to be aware of this and ask those tough questions of all your partners and all your teams internally so that you can, at the end of the day, have a truthful, trustworthy relationship with your customer. Because once a data breach happens, customers are going to be not thinking about like, oh, this is the middle party that lost my data. It's going to be XYZ brand is what who lost my data.
Raashee, I think we need to just bring you back for a separate episode to talk about all the complexities of data privacy and data collection and how that's another thing to consult organizations and agencies and clients on. Because as much as there is conversation happening in the industry about it, and there seems to be a lot of articles, blogs, you name it out there, resources to learn more about it, it seems like nobody knows enough. And the changes are happening too quickly for the amendments to the solutions to catch up. It's happening way too fast. So we'll need to circle back to that one. Two main things that I've been taking away, something that's really been reverberating through our conversation, is that there's a lot of gray space that occurs when you're thinking about whether you're considering outsourcing versus in-housing. It's not just one or the other. There are thousands of shades of gray in between. And a lot of that comes down to the nuances of what's happening at a particular organization. And that's part of what you're really sussing out as a consultancy, is figuring out what are those tiny morsels and details regarding any particular client who wants to go down this path. So I am curious about that in terms of making sure you're accessing enough information from a client. What does that process look like for you to make sure you know enough about them in order to make a recommendation?
Yeah, I wish this was simple because it comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Like it could be as formal as an RFP that a client puts out in the market and they are wanting to kind of like do this and have those conversations. It ranges from that formality to client making just a casual comment. Hey, I'm thinking of bringing this in-house. What do you think? It could be just a passing comment. And what's important is to keeping your ear on the ground in understanding sort of like the context it comes in. If it's formal, that means they have been probably thinking about it for a long time. They've had sort of those conversations internally. No, I wouldn't say their mind has been made, but they are further along on that thought journey, as opposed to a client just casually saying, oh, I might want to bring this in-house to next year, Or what do you think this would look like? Can we do this? So it really ranges. I think the worry becomes is when clients get really excited and they want to do all of it all at once. That's where it's a scary place to be, and that's where some I've seen folks kind of like backpedal to some extent. Again, going back to sort of what shapes and sizes this request may show up is, and how you can find out more in, is really going back to the discovery phase. After you've heard this first off mention of in housing, you really jump into the discovery phase and have those conversations. This could be quantitative and qualitative methods depending on how formal the client is wanting to take this. And this ranges from like just conversations, interviews with various folks on the team, having like QA work sessions, to sort of like really let's answer all these important questions that we've talked about in the podcast earlier, to really get to the bottom of this and to understand their level of maturity, their level of seriousness, their level of intent, and what it looks like. Is it bite sized in housing? Is it full spectrum?
So you do your due diligence because you have a process, you've worked with a lot of different clients. You're obviously a sophisticated professional when it comes to interacting with clients from a consulting and specifically a digital media consulting perspective. But every client does not behave exactly as we want them to. And ultimately, it's their decision what they choose to pursue. So, what are circumstances that lead to a client jumping into the water too fast as it relates to in housing media?
When in housing started and it was kind of like the trend and it was the shiny object, it was really kind of like the illusion of cost saving and need for speed. I feel like those were the two. There are probably other reasons why folks have chosen, but I feel like these two were constant in all the conversations that I would have. Like, oh, we would save a lot of money if we didn't have an agency, and we can do this super fast because they take forever. So I think those two would be the constant reasons to believe that in housing was the place to be. And it really varies, as I said. But in housing media should be looked upon as kind of like setting up a new program. If a client on their were setting up a new program or setting up operations of something internally which required them bringing some technology and staffing up people, in housing should look at the same way. IT people do this all the time. Like they're trying to build a new app, or they're trying to kind of like set up a new system or a database. Like a lot of times marketing folks haven't done that, because that's marketing in general has been kind of like an outsourced function where you have an internal team but you bring in agencies to do the work. So marketers can take a page from the IT playbook to understand what it looks like when you're setting up something internally, which requires technology, which requires financing, which requires contracts, which requires people, which requires process, to do it right. And they should be doing it with the same care, same caution, same diligence that they would have applied to, or their counterparts in IT would have applied to. And I feel clients jump into this too soon, too fast, when they tend to bite too much. And that's where it tends to go downhill. And I think one advantage of media outsourcing in housing is that you can actually be very diligent and do it in bite-sized chunks. And that's the beauty of it. Like if you were building an IT system, it's harder to say, I'm going to only outsource or in-house this component of the platform I'm building, but everything else was going to be done by different people. But I feel like there's a leverage that media has. If you are a multi-channel marketer, you can look at it that way, so you're not getting caught into the situation of you're trying to bite too much and too soon.
I think it's a great point in terms of the reverse scenario of when a client isn't overly ambitious, but instead maybe they're overly cautious. And there is an opportunity for them to test the waters from an in-housing perspective. And they can build a plan that custom works for what they have available at this point in time and what they're going to have available at some, future point in time. So, and also the concept of being overzealous, just maybe having too much energy, because you bring up a point that maybe should be self-evident, but that maybe many of us are overlooking, which is that marketers don't have decades and decades of history with technology. And so it is a shift, and especially for organizations that may be more traditionally oriented, they might have more manual and operational focused processes. And so this shift can come at the expense of saying, if we have enough zeal, if we have enough momentum, we can make it happen. Let's just drive forward, when the reality is, and like a point you've made this entire conversation, you really need to do that front discovery work, and you need to put in the time and energy to make sure you do it right. So an appropriate solution is the conclusion that you come to. So I'm curious to ask you, Raashee, what is a new element related to in-housing that clients should be thinking about this year in particular?
I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, but data privacy, that's just very important. It's important from multiple aspects. One, your relationship with the customers, the brand's relationship with the customers. You own it, you protect it, you cherish it, you nurture it. And secondly, the tech changes that are happening, those tech changes that aren't just media changes, like all the Apple's app tech transparency changes aren't just media related. It does impact your product if it's an app-based product. Again, changes from the cookie-less scenario with Google and Privacy Sandbox. And then third and important component that is continuously getting more complex is the regulations. And regulations will require brands who are the controllers of the data to be more responsible. They have to be more in the know, and they can't just punt it to the partners that they're working with. So it really is important component. And I feel like if folks who are wanting to do in-housing or even outsourcing, the first step is education. Really, we get to understand that. It doesn't mean that data privacy can't be adhered to in an outsourcing scenario. It doesn't require in-housing. It requires is understanding and knowledge and being able to ask those questions and work nicely and make legal your friend.
I don't think you sound like a broken record at all, Raashee. I think it's a point we don't remind ourselves often enough. If anything, sometimes I think with some reason, people feel like they can't uncover the information they need, or they're overburdened with whatever operational work is on their table today. So they're just kind of putting it on the back burner. But the reality is that's not a good strategy, at least based off all information that's available today. So it's a welcome point.
I feel like it's so important, and it's just going to continue to get complicated. So we all have a duty to keep an eye out for it for ourselves and the brands that we represent and the companies that we work with.
Raashee Gupta Erry is the principal and CEO of UpLevel, which is a digital media consultancy. Raashee, we really appreciate the time. And again, I really would like to welcome you back to talk about data privacy more. So that's something we'll have to schedule in the future.
That sounds awesome.
Thanks again to Raashee Gupta Erry, principal and founder of UpLevel Digital Media Consulting. If this episode with Raashee clarified something, it's the number of in-depth considerations that must be reflected on before considering bringing programmatic in-house. But once an organization, whether brand or agency, can be clear with themselves on what they look to achieve, there are so many ways to consider in-housing in an accessible and manageable way. Thanks to Raashee for her thoughts and much-needed advice on how clients can consider this opportunity. That's it for this episode. I'm Noor Naseer. More episodes of AdTech Unfiltered coming up real soon.